So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. So if we could move on to slide number 4, actually, Shingai. The title of today's conversation, and it's a bit of a working title. The next slide, please. And the reason it's a working title is it's an evolving conversation, essentially. So the thinking that we'll talk about today is something that's very much live and evolving as we speak, as recently as this morning in strategic conversations, and continues in many meeting rooms and communities, not just across our city, province, and country, but I'm sure globally as well. So the topic that we're hoping to chat a little bit about today is the evolving role of affordable housing providers, and considering the fact that we need to be showing up as more than just a landlord. So let's talk a bit more about that. So on the next slide, you'll see, just as a bit of an anchor for folks, I know I'm assuming many of you, some of you work for Civida, others have some knowledge of Civida, but just as a bit of an anchor, Civida is a housing management body. We're established through the Alberta Housing Act, through a ministerial order, and we serve about 15,000 tenants within Civida homes. And in addition to that, we administer about 3,400 rent benefits to 3,400 households across the Edmonton area. And in that housing side of our portfolio, we manage close to 5,400 homes across 800 buildings and in about 138 locations. So for the city of Edmonton, we are the largest social and community housing provider. And in the province of Alberta, we're the second largest, second to Calgary Housing Company. So in addition to property management and benefit administration, we also develop new affordable housing. And of particular attention and interest today is the work we do or seek to do in partnerships with other community organizations, such as the organizations a number of you folks come from. So moving on to the next slide. For many of you, you live and breathe this, and so this seems really repetitive, but just to kind of create the context of the space that we find ourselves in within affordable housing, it's a complicated legislative and policy context, and that is actually a huge understatement. One of the roles I had in the government of Alberta before I left there was executive director within the housing ministry. And one of our tasks at that time was to name all of the legislation, all of the policies that were impacting our work. And then to clarify, this is the harder part, clarify who was responsible for what between federal government, provincial government, and municipal government. And housing is just one of those topics that all levels of government play a role. They have different levels of accountability related to mandate, but it's a lot of over top of each other. And so that adds complexity. It also adds opportunity, but it also adds complexity to the work that we do within affordable housing. So one of the things that I wanted to mention here, in addition to the levels of government and the many pieces of legislation that impact us, the many regulations that impact us, is that in 2019, a pretty big watershed moment took place through the National Housing Strategy Act. And at that point, our country, our government, our federal government declared access to housing as a human right. And so you can lay that human right next to all of our other human rights on equity and diversity and freedom of expression. And it clarifies for us in a particular way the level of commitment we as public housing have to creating housing for those who need it within our country. So that's just a little bit of the backdrop in no detail at all, except to say it's complicated and it's deep and it's textured within this space. So just getting on to the next slide. A little bit here about the demand. So we've talked about the context. We've talked about the fact that it's complicated, many actors, many roles. We also have, at this point in time in our history, acute levels of demand for affordable housing. And so I'm sharing with you Civida's perspective on this demand, which I think is a pretty good representation of how we're doing within the city, around the city of Edmonton. And so we reset our priority list back in July of 2023. New regulations were introduced, and we had to reset our entire, what used to be called a wait list. And so we went to 0 on July 1st, 2023. And now are sitting at 8,700 eligible households are sitting eligible and hopeful to access affordable housing. Eligibility means that they are within the income threshold of being able to access community housing and also affordable housing. So 8,700 households. In this current situation, we receive about 1,000 applications per month, and about 70% of those applications become eligible households on the priority list. You'll notice the language related to priority list, and that's really intentional. Something that has been called a wait list for a really long time, we felt from Civida's perspective was actually misleading. Waiting suggests that eventually something will come up and that eventually there will be a housing support available for you. And recognizing the acute demand situation we're in, we made a very conscious decision a year or two ago to change our language to priority list, recognizing that we have greater demand for affordable housing and community housing than we have services available. So about 1,000 folks walk into the Civida office every month, and we receive about 6,000 phone calls. And that can fluctuate as well. And during all of this, with all of this demand and all of this need, we have way less than 1% vacancy across our 5,400 homes. And so at any given moment, we ask for this number regularly, but essentially it fluctuates anywhere between 6 or 7 or 10 homes are available at any given time within the portfolio. So if we think of the 8,700 eligible households and we think of 6 or 7 homes available, you can very much see that the demand far outstrips the capacity that we have as the second largest housing management body to provide those solutions to folks who are looking for housing. So next slide. So we are at a tough point in the city of Edmonton and also within the affordable housing space, recognizing that the vast majority of people who are eligible, waiting and hopeful for housing will not be receiving housing in the traditional ways that we have come to provide housing. And so I just shared this quote from Albert Einstein. We've all heard it before, but essentially reminding us that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And so that's kind of the nexus of what we want to get into today, and is also something that has very much informed the strategic plan that Civida has just renewed. So if we go to the next slide, our strategic plan was shared broadly on social media about a week or so ago. And there are a few evolutions and a few significant changes. And one of the changes that you'll see is the 4 strategic areas of focus. And so I'll get into each of these a little bit, but essentially it's Civida's proposal on how do we begin to address this demand. And so from our perspective and the levers that we have access to, we see 4 possible options to address demand. And so the next slide starts to talk about addressing demand through new capital projects. So super simply, and many of you already know this, but what allows an organization like Civida to offer housing at an affordable rate is capital investments up front, usually in the form of grants from different levels of government. And so the greater the grant, the greater the level of subsidy that can be passed on to the renter. And so in order for Civida to become involved in new capital projects, that means that we require support of government, either through land or through grants. And we are taking every opportunity that's available as an organization to do this new capital development work. Also knowing that we can't build our way out of an 8,700 household challenge, but this is one of the ways that we look to supporting and addressing that demand. So on to the next slide, we can see the topic of acquisition of existing housing. And so many of you are familiar with a rental protection fund that's been announced by the federal government. It's not yet been available, and the date for that availability is pushed out a few times now. But essentially, this is an opportunity across the country to receive grant and capital support to be able to acquire other housing. So what that means for a group like Civida is it would allow us to purchase an apartment building, let's say, and then to offer that apartment building at more affordable rates than the private landlord would have been able to do so. So from our strategic plan and from our perspective, this is a second method to offer more affordable housing in the city of Edmonton and area. Next slide. A third opportunity to address the demand is doing more of what we're already doing a lot of, but doing more of it. And so that is providing more housing benefits to eligible households and families across the city. And so many of you would have heard of rent assistance benefit. And essentially that it's an income supplement that goes directly to the family, to the individual in the household, and supports them to make their private market rent more affordable. And so we redid the rates of that benefit about a year ago, and folks within our area are now eligible for a 1-bedroom up to a $700 benefit, 2 bedrooms, $800, and 3 or more bedrooms, $900 per month eligibility. And then that benefit, the upside of this benefit is it increases affordability for individuals and families, and it's very easy to administer. And of course, doesn't require maintenance and renewal and upkeep. It's a benefit that provides agency to the families to choose their own place to live, and then helps to make that cost more affordable. So 1, 2, 3, I've gone through 3 examples of how we feel we can start to address the demand that we're facing. And the fourth topic, which is on the next slide, is the reason that we're here today. And so that is a fourth priority area identified in our strategic plan, which is creating enabling conditions to create new outcomes for families that are accessing affordable housing. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick moment to have a little sip of water. Okay, and so this is a topic we'll get into a little bit more here. And this is a bit more complex. So this is not a grant to build a building, and it's not money to be distributed into your bank accounts, but it's a little bit of a different approach that is a little less concrete, but we believe equally as possible and accessible, and a place that we as Civida want to show up, and puts us into a place of of not just your regular landlord. Next slide, please. So many of you working in the social services field would be aware of core brain story and adverse childhood experiences. And so for those that are new to some of this information, this is research and data that has been gathered and repeatedly shown to illustrate that conditions within our family, conditions within our community will enable better or worse outcomes. It's not a guarantee that if I'm raised in a loving home and have food in my belly and a nice warm house to live in and social supportive relationships around me, it's not a guarantee that I'll have a great outcome, but I'm far more likely to have a great outcome than if I'm raised in a house that is struggling with addictions, with sexual abuse, mental illness, or one of my parents has been incarcerated, as an example. So this is referred to as adverse childhood experiences. And it's been repeatedly and empirically shown to be a key factor and a really important factor into life outcomes. So the reason I'm talking about this is because if we assume this science and this research to be true, this can help to inform us about where it would be important for us to head. So just in this slide here, they're calling it the pair of ACEs, which means within the household, the adverse childhood experiences, and also within the community. And so if we go to the next slide, because all good social workers tend to be strengths focused. And so we couldn't help but create the strength focus slide of this concept, which is really what are those enabling conditions? And here I've named it as enabling conditions for community safety and well-being, thinking of safety and well-being as kind of those big high-level outcomes that we all really want to achieve. And then how do we create the conditions around achieving those? So it's by now looking at strengths or protective factors. So protective factors within our community and protective factors within our families and our households. And so you can see from here that communities that have some economic mobility, meaning you can change your situation, circumstances are available to improve. There's a sufficiency of income or an opportunity to achieve a sufficiency of income. Communities that are more equal and equitable tend to have better outcomes. Communities with gender parity and societies with gender parity tend to be more protective and better outcomes. Social capital, so relationships, so communities where you not only feel safe, but you feel connected and a part of something. Safe and neighborhoods and communities, as well as quality, affordable housing, of course. And then at the top of the tree, we can see those enabling conditions within families and households that lead to better outcomes. And all of us who are parents, so this is something we definitely try to keep in mind in our best parenting moments, and every now and then we slip as well. So it's good to know what the ultimate possibilities are available. So the next slide. So keeping all of that in mind, if we apply this now to the housing context, so historically, and there's, all sorts of policy that's preceded us and about 70 years of public housing in our country with all sorts of different focuses and assumptions attached to it. But one of the things that I would say is that the assumption or the function has been largely focused on the housing itself, on the roof over heads, people inside, check, job is done from an affordable housing perspective. The rent is affordable, the family or the individual is housed. And so the proposal here is that when we pay attention to the social aspects, there's actually quite a strong interface with the continuum of housing. So you guys would all be responsible with this continuum, and I'm wanting to kind of increase my screen because my old eyes. But on the left-hand side, we have folks living within houselessness, homelessness, all the way to the far right end of the continuum of market ownership of a home, and then everything that comes in between. And so this housing continuum is a pretty common way of understanding affordable housing in our province and also in our country. And so as we progress down to the right-hand side, we see more housing stability and also a lessening of supports, social supports as we move through and as folks are able to gain agency and potentially improve their circumstances as a possibility. And so what we really like about this image, and I will say quite openly, we stole this from United Way, Nova Scotia, because they did an excellent job of bringing together core brain science and adverse childhood experiences understanding to the housing continuum. And so you can see in here some aspects that can be influenced by choices or access to supports, et cetera, and some that are just life and there's no preventing it. And so if we look at interactions or interventions that potentially support someone to move through the continuum, throughout the housing continuum, we can see access to shelter, maybe the family themselves connects with some services, maybe there's access to education, employment situation improves, mental health stability, and maybe all the way into that home ownership circumstance is kind of what we see at the top end of this continuum, or on the top side here. On the bottom side, we can also see examples of what can spiral any one of us into more housing precarity. And those are things like severe illness or loss of a partner. Maybe we've retired from our job or lost our job. And so this continuum, as much as we like to present it in a very two-dimensional way, and you just move from one end to the other end, the reality is there are many dimensions to this, and many of those dimensions are social. And so just an opportunity to kind of take the concepts of housing and the concepts of brain science and understanding social determinants of health, essentially, and combining those together. So that's kind of the big idea. So when we think about bringing all these pieces of knowledge together, leaning on the research, leaning on the science, and being a housing provider. So being a landlord, being a entity, a nonprofit entity that's responsible for 5,400 homes, taking care of them and maintaining them and collecting rents and keeping the sites clean and all of those things. Civida's also made a decision to consider what are the practice changes or enhancements that we need to do to show up to this reality, to show up to being our best enabler of those conditions. How can we create those best conditions for our tenants so that they can, live out their precious lives? And so from a policy paradigm shift perspective, these are some of the practice changes that we've been implementing at Civida, that we continue to implement at Civida, and that we continue to learn through. And so some of this is, blinding flash of the obvious, the trauma-informed approach. And yet, as obvious as that seems, I wouldn't say that that's been a cornerstone or key part of the housing paradigm for that many years. It's definitely raising now and becoming more important in current context, but it is relatively new on the scene of assuming that that's how we need to show up as a maintenance technician, as a leasing clerk, as a housing clerk, that having a trauma-informed approach and understanding the impacts of trauma are very, very important to us doing our technical jobs as well as we interface with our tenants and our customers. We've also, oh, I'm still on that slide, Shingai, sorry. We've also worked hard to think about how do we make ourselves and our content more accessible. And so what we mean by that is we have many, many different languages that are first languages for our tenants and for our applicants. And so our tech team, our communications team have all worked really hard to find ways to make our website more accessible, to make in-person contact more accessible. And a large percentage of our interactions with our applicants and our tenants involve some form of translation services and increasing that accessibility. And as recently as 2-3 years ago, that wasn't something that was on Civida's radar to the extent that it is, and it's something we always look to improve. Many of you will know that a little over a year ago, we did an organizational restructure that had our staff deployed out to the sites, so out to the housing sites. And so we have 8 district offices, and that was very much intentionally done as a way to be more connected with our tenants, more available to our tenants, and also be on the ground and have a really good sense of what was happening in Civida communities across the portfolio. And so that's been a really successful service delivery change, and we continue to keep learning and growing with that process as well. An approach to, sorry, Shingai. I think Shingai's telling me I'm long-winded. So a successful tenancies is another key paradigm shift for us. And so whereas the Residential Tenancies Act and other supportive legislation is pretty clear when a landlord can evict and can proceed down an eviction kind of route, those tools and instruments continue to be available, but they are not a first point of thought for Civida or Civida's practice approach. So our team is out there every day working really, really hard with tenants who are facing many challenges, and they're working hard to support our tenants to have successful tenancies. So whether that's challenges between neighbors or challenges with housing precarity, getting rent paid. At the end of the day, we are a landlord and do need the rent to be paid in order for us to keep our business afloat. But at the same time, we really try to work with tenants, but also with our partners to bring in our partners as much as possible to support families to be successful in tenancy, but also in life. We also recognize the connection to community safety and well-being, and that all of these approaches we believe are enabling better outcomes, or we know we're enabling better outcomes for not only the tenants, but also the larger community beyond the Civida sites. And we're happy to be a part of that and to be responsible with our role in that. And then just the last thing that I would say that for many of us sums up the paradigm shift that's taken place here at Civida over the last couple of years is that we have very much believe that we have transitioned from an organization that perhaps thought you, the applicant, or you, the tenant, are lucky that I'm serving you, to I am lucky to be serving you. And so that is really the mission and the mantra that we seek to live up to. Shingai, I am done with this slide. Okay, so that's kind of the big hairy idea, guys, is taking these different lines of thought together and thinking about new possibilities, enabling new opportunities. We have, many stories, which I'm thinking now would have been great to have brought to this conversation today. And if folks on the line have some stories to share of enabling conditions that have created better outcomes, I welcome you to do so when we open it up to Q&A. We recognize that for some people, community and social housing is where they will live out their days, and that is perfectly fine. That is absolutely the right thing for some people. For some folks, community, social, and affordable housing is one stop along the way. And for those folks that have that desire and that wish and that ability, we want to make sure that we're working with our community partners to create those opportunities. And so the way that we do it now always looking to improve, and that's what this slide is all about, is we're still learning and growing, absolutely. But the way that we do it now is we have about 24 sites across the Civida sites where we have partners with us on site, delivering service, working together with our partners. And that's everybody from the awesome people at Amity House to Riverbend Rocks, BGC Biggs, the Family Center, Bent Arrow, just so many partners to name, and really, really valued relationships that we know are in service to our tenants. So that is, we are not funded to be the social service support partner. That's not our area of expertise. We do some great community engagement, and we do have some social workers on staff, but our primary role is around housing. And so looking to create those partnership opportunities is very much a huge piece of our focus and our desire as we look to work together with the experts in the community. So we don't have it figured out. We have a declaration here. We have a commitment to a general path forward. You can see it all the way into our strategic plan and supported by our board. And we're looking to learn and grow together with our community partners as we proceed forward. And then the next slide is really kind of setting us up, I guess, for this next little bit is the conversation that I hope we can have together. So what are the additional ways that we can continue to work better together? And so we know that there's additional opportunities for us to think about on Civida site. So we look for those conversations and those opportunities. And we're also really keen to hear your feedback. And I will tell you, we have some great relationships with partners that bring us not great feedback. And what I mean by that, the feedback's good, but what they have to say about how we've been doing is not good. And it's really important for us as Civida to hear that and to honor those experiences and to keep improving. So we are on a learning journey. I know all of us are, but we at Civida are very much on a learning journey. We're really open to how we need to keep showing up better for our tenants within the resources that we have available. And we're really keen to keep working in new and better ways with our community partners. And that's kind of the end of the presentation. So there's just a little email address there if anyone wants to reach out after the fact. But I think, Doris, it's over to you now.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Bree, for your presentation. It was amazing. We have some really good questions in the chat, so please feel free to any of the participants using the Q&A function. I'll try to get to as many as possible here. But Bree, first question is, do you have any recommendations for an average citizen to help out with the housing crisis? We hear a lot about businesses stepping up, levels of government stepping up. How can a citizen help?
Yeah, oh my goodness, what a great question. That question gets me excited. So I would say the very, very first thing is, and this is for all of us, is checking our own biases and assumptions. Some of the language that gets used around affordable housing or social housing really is not only not trauma informed, but it's also not understanding the systems that have created how we are today. And so we know that our systems are built on legacies that we know a lot more now and we can do a lot better now. And so I think any form of blaming or lack of understanding for why people find themselves in the circumstances they're in, that to me is the very first thing that any one of us can do, is to recognize that you know, all of us are doing our very best, and most people don't desire or plan to live in community housing. That's not their wish or their goal for them or their families either. And so the first thing is our mindset and how we understand the circumstances that folks are living in within Civida homes. But the second thing is that we actually, and we haven't talked about this, but we have a subsidiary of Civida. It's called the Civida Housing Foundation. And we just in the last 2 years are really starting to kick off the foundation and very specifically to raise money to increase supports on Civida sites. That is one of the biggest areas of focus for the Civida Housing Foundation. And so we are keen to get the word out about the foundation. We have some early partnerships with businesses where you know, businesses are doing, you know, how an office will get together and raise money for something or choose a charity of choice. We would really encourage folks to think about Civida Housing Foundation as a charity of choice, to think about how to contribute in ways. We have an endowment that we've started. So when you give money to an endowment, it actually gives money to a legacy, right? To build that legacy sustainability that keeps investing itself back in the lives of people who are living in affordable housing. So those would be some of the ways. If you're a professional out there working together with shared participants, how can we work together to just increase communication and awareness of each other's services, and, you know, wrap around the families that we all want to support best and work as a team? I guess that would be my third suggestion. But thanks for the awesome question. There's so many other ways. Those are just a couple that come to mind.
Thank you, Bree. Next question is a little bit of a two-part question. At the beginning of your presentation, you talked about Civida's priority list. It's growing, 1,000 applications a month. What type of housing is required, and what is Civida doing to consider accessible units in their new developments?
I should throw that one to you. Shouldn't I, Doris?
You should, but
yeah, I'm just gonna kung fu roll that right back at you. So Doris is our director. What's your title, Doris?
Director of Planning and Project Delivery. I had to think about that for a second.
You had to think about it too. So Doris is our one of our key leaders related to all of our new stuff. So Doris, I'll throw it back to you. How do we address accessibility in our new designs and in our redevelopments as well?
No, again, I was really excited when I saw that question. So I was hoping to hear what you had to say. But again, great question. In our new developments, we're really taking our lessons learned, and we want to ensure that there's housing available for everyone who needs it. So we are building from 1 bedrooms up to 5 bedrooms, a mix of townhouse apartment styles. And then in all of our new developments, we are ensuring that we're putting accessible units in them. We're also building them under a universal design standards. So if and when a unit needs to be changed to an accessible unit, it's easy to do so. So we are planning for right now, but we're also making sure that we're planning for the future.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And Doris is our lead on all the physical stuff. The only additional thing I would add is that this is another learning space for all of us. And so we're really lucky to rely on a number of partners in the community, including Voices for Albertans with Disabilities and the Autism Society, who've helped us to build an accessibility framework that we look to layer on top of the decisions that we make. And so how have we thought about ableism or accessibility as we proceed forward in our own policies, practices, and also in the physical structure, as Doris is sharing too. So thanks for the question. That's awesome.
Great question. I have a question here. Bree, does Civida do any partnerships with seniors housing?
Great. Yeah. So that is not, we have seniors, we absolutely do house seniors, but we are not a delivery agent of seniors housing in the province. We're not mandated to do seniors housing. And so our partner, or kind of our sister or brother who does that, would be the Greater Edmonton Foundation. And so they are a senior specialist, and they would be the folks that are probably the best resource for seniors that are looking for affordable housing within Edmonton.
There's a lot of comments on the chat in regards to sharing the presentation, sharing the slides. I just want to let everyone know that we will absolutely do that. I know not everyone can get here right at 12 and we started a little bit late, but we will do our best to share the presentation. I have one question, Bree, about the social aspects using the enabling conditions you talked about here. Yeah. How has Civida's practice approach been successful? So do you have any examples that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can share a couple specific examples. One that comes to mind is putting a trauma-informed lens on our own policies and the way that we have functioned. And so I mentioned in the presentation that legislation allows us as landlords to proceed down certain routes once certain criteria have been met. And so to just follow what's available to us as a landlord would not be a trauma-informed approach. And so we've rethought a few things related to, more than a few things, many things. And one quick example is the situation of when we have a fire within our units. So as an example, historically, if there's a fire in a unit, that tenancy historically with Civida would end. So in particular, if it was the fault of the tenant. So let's say, you know, your son starts making grilled cheese sandwiches and a grease fire starts, or et cetera. Some of us speaking from experience on that one. But the historical approach to that would have been eviction, essentially, for the tenant, regardless of the situation, regardless of the intention. So around the time that we were giving some new thought to this historical practice, we had a Civida tenant who had placed a butane bottle in an oven and exploded it, and it started a fire within the unit. That, you know, that moved to eviction. That was intentional, and it was potentially very harmful and unsafe. Right around the same time, we had a mom started cooking, ran upstairs to attend to one of the children, came back down, and a grease fire had started in the kitchen. And so rather than proceeding with the historical thinking on, you know, if there's a fire, you must go kind of approach, we really looked at how do we increase the safety for this family, for the neighbors, because of course we want to keep everybody safe, and looked at supporting mom with some fire education, did move her to a new unit because our assumption is that a mom and her 3 kids now being homeless based on that fire in their home is that's of no positive contribution to our community. So that's one tangible example. I think the other thing is just in general, holding our role lightly and seeing where we can ebb and flow. So at the end of the day, Civida has to pay its bills. And I've had this conversation with many EDs across the sector. You know, I'd love to be able to reduce rent or offer low cost or free rent in different circumstances. And there's so many good reasons to do so. But if Civida doesn't take care of Civida's business, then we won't be able to provide affordable housing. And so at the end of the day, rents need to be paid. Those sorts of things do need to happen. But there's also a lot of flexibility and creativity that can be thought of in how we support people to be successful, or agencies to be successful within Civida sites too. So I don't know if that gave enough on the tangible examples, but
No,
those are
that's
things that come
great.
to
It's
mind.
always good to hear examples with all the great work that Civida is doing at the moment. In wrapping up, I think we're near done our questions here, but I wanted to give you an opportunity after hearing the question, after doing your presentation, what final thoughts would you give us, Bree, on, you know, it's housing month, there is a crisis, Civida has made a significant shift in their approach. What do you want to leave the participants here with today? What would be your final thoughts?
I guess having spent, I know we say over 2 decades, almost 30 years in this social space in trying to find ways to improve conditions for, individuals and families who've grown up in situations that haven't been as conducive to good outcomes. And I think one of the things I would focus on is the hopefulness that I feel in many ways how society is advancing its thinking, how we're beginning to think about things in more sophisticated ways that are more in line with the challenges that we're facing. I think the science and the research is supporting us to think and do better. And I also think that the more of us that get focused on the big outcomes at the end of the day, and I tend to just name those as safety and well-being, because I think we all want that. We want that for our families. We want that for our communities. We want that for each other. If we all stay focused on safety and well-being and thoughtful about how we engage with each other to keep advancing in that direction, I believe many great things are happening today, and even more great things can continue to happen when we look out for each other and treat each other with some grace and kindness. Not one person on this call or in this city or in this country, for that matter, has all the solutions for affordable housing or any of the social challenges that we face. All of the solutions are amongst all of us and in the collective, and showing up with humility and grace to do that work together is, I think, some of the most hopeful things that we can kind of attach ourselves to, and that truly can make a difference, that if we want to see different outcomes, we need to show up a little bit differently. And I think Civida's done a really good job of thinking about that, but also has more work to do. We know we have more work to do. It's a work in progress, but I'm really grateful to do it in this city with the amazing partners that we get to work with and the amazing team. I think our Civida team doesn't get the credit. They're out there every day, being kind and patient and thoughtful and supportive and doing their job, which could be fixing a doorbell at the same time. And so I'm just really grateful to the team that we also have here at Civida. So that would be my final thoughts.
Oh, that's very well said. And I certainly would echo your comments around the wonderful team here at Civida and really taking it back to why we're here. I truly believe that in collaboration with all levels of government, all partners, we can make a significant difference in the crisis that we're facing here in Edmonton. So I want to thank everyone for their time on their lunch hour. Thank you to Bree. Thank you for everyone on the Civida team who has been helping with the hosting of this webinar. And thank you to the participants. If you have any further questions, we will be sharing the slides. Please reach out to Bree if you have any questions, or you can find myself as well. But again, thank you. Have a really great day. Stay warm. It's starting to get cold outside.
Thanks,
Thank
Dora.
you, everyone.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, everybody. Take care.